Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting session on RPA and Intelligent Automation Live. Our next speaker will be Eric Fisher, Senior Solutions Architect for Micro Focus. He's going to talk about RPA for the enterprise. And Eric has been with Micro Focus for the last 13 years by way of Opsware, HP, and HP&E. He has nearly 20 years of industry experience in automation and orchestration, and he has been an RPA product evangelist for the last 2 years. To talk about RPA for the enterprise, please welcome Eric Fisher.
Eric has been with Proqis Focus for the last 13 years.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I appreciate the introduction, Jose. Again, my name is Eric Fisher. I'm a solution architect at Micro Focus. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about enterprise RPA and what that means and how that's different from just, if you've done any research or having exploration on RPA and some of the differences there. So I'm, been kind of a subject matter expert in our RPA since we introduced RPA a few years ago, but been following and managing our practice around automation for, as Jose mentioned, about the last 13 years or so. And happy to join today. So we'll be talking a little bit about RPA. Hopefully that makes sense. With that, what some of the differences are with enterprise class RPA, and go through a couple of customer use cases, including one of our own that we're pretty proud of for one of our internal business units, and then we'll be closing out with any questions you might have. So first, by nature of definition, to make sure we're speaking the same language. So RPA, robotic process automation, it is basically a software robot technology that mimics, human-based interaction with IT and other systems, business process systems in the environment. And I want to emphasize that UI-based human actions. That's really critical to understanding the difference between RPA in general versus some of the other technologies around scripting and actions and orchestration that exist. So with enterprise RPA, what you're doing is really combining this notion of screen record capability, to be able to play that back in workflows to simulate or automate business processes. And critical and key to enterprise class RPA is to do this in a 24/7 mode for mission critical needs with data protection and auditability built into it. So how do I get to, doing RPA for me, for instance? I want to automate my task to, now I need to extend this to the rest of the enterprise. And because I'm doing that, I need to make sure it's safe and secure, resilient, and works reliably any time of the day or night. So where does RPA come from? In fact, if you've been in technology long enough, you probably remember, on your desktop, this little macro recorder where you could, hit record and record what you're doing. So, maybe doing some work in a spreadsheet or opening up an application, you can record that task. And I remember back at least 25 years ago seeing that on my desktop. So really coming, a long time in the coming on that. And then about 20 so years ago, the industry introduced this notion of test automation. There were a few products out in the industry. Mercury Interactive, introduced their functional testing application, but really geared towards how do I automate the testing of applications in a very resilient and repeatable way. Application testing, UI testing, make it very repeatable. In the early, late 2000s, 2007, 8, 9, really was this growth, this hyper growth of orchestration. Number of players came out. Really the idea was to, how do I automate IT processes? And how do I, automate and bring together multiple disparate systems from an API and command line perspective and make that very repeatable, scriptable, put things in production, turn command lines into APIs and such. So really over the last 5 years with RPA, it's really taking the best of both of those worlds and opening it up to a new set of users where you have more business-centric or UI-centric users that are trying to do mission critical or important tasks for the environment. So it's merging this IT process with UI process, back-end systems and front-end systems, attended mode versus unattended mode, bringing those all together in a single enterprise type of application, make it always available. And the best way that I can find to describe this is to put this into terms that are a little bit more plain language. And I like to use this scenario because it really does, help me to explain a couple of things I talk about when I talk to my customers. And we're going to use an analogy that I think most of us, if not all of us, are familiar with, and that's that of a toll booth, right? Whether you're going into a parking lot or going through a toll road, the idea is you've got two people that are negotiating an exchange of goods for passage. In this case, we got a car that drives up to the toll booth. The toll taker says that'll be $2. The person in the car hands the toll taker a $5 bill, expects some change, expects a receipt. Hopefully, if everything meets the requirements, the gate opens up on the toll road and the driver is allowed to pass through. So RPA is really around changing that experience to remove the human interaction part of it, to turn that all into a robotic process. Driver comes up and no longer has to communicate with the person, just hits the big red button, and they continue with their process to exchange that currency for passage on the toll road. What I want to stress with that is RPA is not about process change, and it's not about process reengineering. When you think about implementing kind of a crawl, walk, run scenario for implementing automation, the worst thing you can actually do is jump right to the run stage without getting there slowly. And the best way you can get a huge return on your investment on really any automation, but in particular RPA, is to look at what your manual processes are today, the ones that are manual, the ones that are very repetitive, and how do I automate those using the process that exists today? Not changing change control process, not implementing new steps, not making any other tweaks or changes, but literally just implementing the process as it is today and hardening it, making it secure, making it resilient, and making it available to anybody in the enterprise to be able to run. So hopefully that's clear to everyone. So what is needed for enterprise RPA to work? Well, it all starts with a foundation of kind of an enterprise orchestration platform. So if you're not familiar with orchestration, again, I mentioned before, this is a technology platform that allows you to automate multiple different kind of tasks. And historically, over the last 10, 15 years, this has been around IT processes. Things like incident, change, event, and being able to do that through ad hoc or schedule activities, or even embed these into your service request process. The purpose of orchestration is to bring together multiple teams, multiple tools, multiple environments, so you can run consistent processes, all the time by any user. I like to think about this as kind of, if you think about the Staples, if you're familiar with the Staples office supply store, a while back they had this campaign where they used the big red easy button, right? You push the button, a voice comes out and says that was easy and the job was done, right? That is really what orchestration is trying to do for our users, is to implement that kind of easy button to implement any kind of task that you might need. And as we surveyed our customers and the industry got surveyed, this was a survey that was done by Tech Validate a few years ago. Really, the results today haven't changed, but these are the top use cases that enterprises and executives are looking to automate with orchestration in general. Right? So task and process automation, predominantly is a huge use case in there. You also got event and incident remediation, change management. If you skip down the list, you got a lot of things around cloud and network management, application deployment. DevOps is becoming a growing one. In fact, actually, I'd be willing to bet that if resurveyed again, DevOps would be a lot higher than the 28% at this point. Disaster recovery automation. But the idea is all these use cases have something very common, very similar and in common, and that is the ability to push the button to execute a task very, very repeatable over and over and over again. When you start looking at RPA, the requirement doesn't change, just how you interact with your different systems does. So what you get with RPA is that same orchestration engine. In this particular round, enterprise RPA, you get that orchestration engine that is very scalable, very powerful, highly available, but now you've put behind it an army of robots. These robots now have the ability to execute tasks through a user interface, whether it's a web-based application, a thick client, a thin client, a terminal emulator, some sort of a UI technology on a desktop, mimicking mouse movements, mimicking commands through interfaces, be able to pull all this together using that same capability that we had before around workflows, but now bringing in UI automation into that. So this notion of robots on demand is, as part of the orchestration, is really at the heart of what enterprise RPA is. How do I have robots that have various skills associated with them and scale them up and down based on time of day, day of the week, day of the month, and do that only when work is needed, and when work's not needed, scale the robot army back down so that it's doing, and consuming less resources, and you can reduce the enterprise footprint you have on your server farms, et cetera, for running and managing this infrastructure. So the idea to scale up and scale down as needs and demands change. So to shift around, what is required for enterprise RPA, and so this is, a couple of points I want to emphasize, and we'll get in, a little bit more detail on a couple of these, and I'll talk through how this impacts, a couple of use cases. But really, enterprise RPA focuses on, first of all, ease of use and accessibility. It has to have a easy to use designs experience, access to low and no code authoring capabilities, the ability to drag and wire multiple steps together and multiple recordings together and multiple API calls together, and very quick and easy to adopt and learn. And that's very critical to be able to adopt enterprise class system. It's one thing when you're running an RPA tool on your own desktop, but when you start scaling this out to hundreds, if not thousands of users, it has to be very easy to consume. And that's, I don't want to understate that. The second is this notion of around resilient robots. So a resilient robot is the ability to adapt to UI changes and look at advanced and intelligent object recognition. So what does that mean? And we'll get into a little bit more detail about this, but it's the idea of be able to not just follow X, Y coordinates of where the mouse is, because that has inadvertent challenges to it. What happens if the screen resolution changes? What happens if the user changes? How do you consistently, reliably, repeat a recorded process if you're relying upon where the mouse is clicking on a particular screen and on your desktop? So resilient robots, it really is the ability to look away from XY coordinates and start talking at the protocol level to for the applications you're interacting with. Third is this notion of the central robot orchestration. Just talked about that a moment ago on the previous slide. This is really, how do I take my UI automation, merge it with my API automation, and create and manage robots, do this all centrally, do this from a hosted or a managed solution, and do this at a very scalable, mission critical method. Now, all of this is great, but if you can't access it, if you can't execute these things, then the usefulness of the technology starts diminishing. And so having some sort of a self-service portal or an API or an interface to be able to execute these things is very important for enterprise class RPA. Again, a lot of the early RPA adopters were very desktop centric. I could open up a widget on my desktop or double click on an icon, it will execute my task for me. Again, think way back 25 years ago around that macro recorder, it was only as good as having that macro on your desktop and be able to double click on it and execute that process, right? So extending that and making it available to anybody is very, very important here. As is the scalable robots, which we also just talked about. So how do I scale up and down based off of the workloads that are being asked of me? How do I ensure that I have enough capacity to do my job? If I've got an end of month, financial report task that I want to do. For instance, I've got a customer of mine that their requirement was to, at the end of the month, they wanted to execute 1,000 times in concurrency to pull down simultaneous reports, assemble them together, and get the results out to decision makers in the organization as quickly as possible. Prior to implementing our RPA solution, they were spending a month trying to pull together all those reports. And the more people they threw into it, they could shrink that time down. And just prior to implementing RPA, it was taking them a week. So every month they spend the last week, putting all these reports together. And now they can do it in the matter of, I don't want to say minutes, but definitely hours, fully automated from, an unattended task. It's scheduled to run, at 10 o'clock on the last day of the month, and executes the task completely seamlessly without people being involved. And then the last thing, anytime you talk about enterprise, the criticality around encryption and data protection, sensitivity, you've got privacy requirements coming from Europe and the new ones coming from California, and more states will, most likely follow in the coming years. But how do I ensure that what I'm doing and what I'm controlling is secure, is controlled, that is protected, and that if I ever had any challenges or problems, I can go back and understand what happened, and it's, you know, has a full audit log with it. And you can use that audit log to understand, you know, timings, and even have its own ROI calculator built into it, so you understand the value that it's returning back to you. Now, I wanted to double click on a couple of those topics. So the resilient robot, here's a couple of screenshots I'll show as an example, right? So if you've ever used Salesforce.com, you probably recognize this screen. The challenge with automating Salesforce.com is every user is going to have a different interface experience. Maybe they've used dark mode versus light mode, or they've hidden certain menu objects or anything else. So if all you're doing is recording your sessions, then, you know, what happens when you execute this on user number 1, but user number 2 has a completely different desktop layout for their application? Are they going to be able to find, you know, the cases menu if the cases menu is hidden or moved to the far left? So native object recognition is really around looking at the protocol level of the application, understand what it's doing, what field you're clicking on, what field you're reading, and understanding the application at that level and putting in some intelligence into it so that if an OK button changes its wording to a submit button, that the recording and the playback of that recording still works consistently, reliably. And being able to do that not just to the web level, but things, you know, thick clients like SAP or terminal emulators like Rumba and Reflection X and Putty, web-based applications, whether HTML or Flash or HTML5, and you know, things as simple as just, you know, generic Windows applications, things like a, you know, Excel application, you know, PowerPoint, you know, Microsoft's MMC, things like that. So how do I more natively understand the user interface so that I don't have to worry about re-recording my interface every time that something changes? And the second thing that I want to double click on is this notion of the easy to use design studio. Please, my recommendation is don't be fooled by the difference between easy to use and low and no code, right? So low and no code is certainly a feature of easy to use, but what tends to happen is, you know, a lot of the RPA vendors out there are kind of hiding so much the complexity around how their product works that it becomes very inflexible. You want to look for a product that not only lets you kind of adopt a low and no code, you know, RPA strategy for, you know, for doing things very quickly, to, you know, recording your process very quickly, but then it gives you that advanced flexibility for, you know, bringing in advanced scripting technologies, things like Python or JavaScript, be able to put in regular expressions as needed, as you need to improve your skills, as you need the, you know, capability to do something more sophisticated. And you marry that with, you know, a repository or a library of out-of-the-box content, so that for a lot of the more common things, you don't have to do that scripting. For anything you're recording, you don't have to do any scripting. But then as your needs evolve, as you start integrating with, you know, customer proprietary applications that the industry hasn't seen before because, you know, you've written them in-house, how do you integrate with those particular applications? How do you onboard them into your RPA process? So that's really, you know, I just want to stress that one more time is, you know, don't pigeonhole yourself into a product that, you know, limits you to, you know, very specific tasks or interfaces, and gives you the ability to start there, but then grow as your needs evolve. Now, this one I'm not going to read, but this was actually from the Forrester Wave report, the last one that was done on RPA, but really to stress that, you know, first of all, there's 100 and something different RPA vendors in the industry, and this is a sampling of the kind of the top 3. There's about 5 or so that kind of are in that upper right-hand quadrant of the Wave report, but essentially these, you know, some, you know, examples of some of the top 3, you know, vendor deficiencies. So as you're evaluating RPA products, you know, I want to leave you with two thoughts. First of all, look at what you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to accomplish it, and make sure the product does what you need it to do. And second is, RPA is relatively inexpensive. Most of the customers we're working with have at least 2 different RPA products, because they have different needs. They have RPA products that are there for desktop-based automation, or you know, RPA that's doing, you know, certain web-based tasks. And the industry is still evolving to the point where There's no clear one winner. There's multiple different ways to do something. Every vendor has their own different strategies and strengths and weaknesses. But the key thing is making sure that you're picking, if you haven't gone down the path, is to pick the vendor that gives you the most amount of flexibility, security, availability for the processes you're trying to automate. And so now we start talking about the customer side of things. Who actually needs it? Who are the customers, and what are some of those customers doing? So I kind of teased about this at the beginning, but there's really mainly two personas in the RPA field. There's this IT-centric user and a business-centric user. With the IT side, what they're looking for is the ability to continue down the orchestration path, but grow beyond what their knowledge allows them to automate with. So one of my customers, they got stuck with their orchestration product, not because the technology was lacking, but because they lacked the necessary subject matter expertise to integrate with everything they were being asked to integrate with. They were trying to build provisioning workflows, but they knew nothing about provisioning into storage or provisioning into the network. And the network team, the storage team, knew how to use their tools, but really didn't know much about the APIs for the tools and knew nothing about the orchestration language. So you've got this kind of chicken and the egg problem around, orchestration and automation in the data center, where you've got a set of users that need to automate something, but they don't know how the process works. And the users that know how the process works don't know how the tool works. So how do you get these two teams to work together without doing a whole bunch of cross-training? So the answer really becomes give the subject matter expert the recorder, let them record their process, hand the recording back to you, and then you embed that into the automation workflow. And that's really one of the areas where RPA is becoming very beneficial in the IT space. On the business side of things, it's everything that's been driving RPA since the very beginning of time. I want to grow my workforce, workplace efficiency through automation. It's not necessarily about optimization. I just want to do my job and do it for me. Well, chances are, if I need to do something for me, that there might either be 5 or 10 other people that have the exact same need. So instead of building something just for me, how do I build it for a bunch of me's? My entire team or my entire division. And when you start looking at large call centers, an example, a banking call center might have 2,000 agents that have the same exact need every single day. These are not programmers, these are not coders. They don't know how to write workflows. They don't know how to embed error correction, all these other things. You got a team of automation people that are very good at doing that. These people know how to do their daily job, which is answer a call, look for some answers, automate the process of gathering information and providing it back to the user. Well, if I can do all of that and record that and hand that to somebody who can then put that into an automated process, then as a call center agent, all I have to do is just click the button and then information comes to me almost immediately, right? So mundane, repetitive, error-prone work, something that costs time on the phone with an operator, between an operator and a customer, things like that. So let me give you a couple of real-world examples with some tangible information behind it. So the first example actually happens to be our own example. So Micro Focus is a very large software company. We've got about 18,000 employees worldwide. I like to describe Micro Focus as the largest company you've probably never heard of, but you probably at some point have used our technologies, if not today, in the relatively near future, or a recent past, I should say. We're a global organization. We support hundreds and hundreds of countries, thousands of companies worldwide, multiple different languages and multiple different currencies as a result of that. So the challenge for our finance department was, how do I keep up with that pace? How do I make sure that when we do a quote, that when we look at our forecast reports, when we look at the data that requires us to have dollars and currency involved, how do I make sure I'm doing it with today's information? And so, as any large company needs to do that's global in nature, is we have a person on staff every day when they get to work. The first thing they do is they log into the request builder, which is a application from Bloomberg, downloads the latest financial reports, in particular grabs the currency, the central bank exchange rates for the currency, and then imports into the Oracle NetSuite application that we use for our finance operations management. It's the same exact process every single day. and it takes that person 20 minutes, right? So it's very repetitive. It's potentially error proof or error prone. There's a risk of something going wrong, but it takes 20 minutes every single day out of the person's job. Very repetitive. Everything leads to what we can do with RPA. So we actually, in our case, used our own RPA product, Micro Focus's RPA. We worked with our consulting partner with DXC, and recorded that amongst other processes, but reduced that to 3 minutes of technical time, and the person actually doesn't even have to be involved anymore. It's launched as a scheduled job. So every morning at 8 a.m., the schedule goes off. When that analyst comes to work, no longer do they have to log in and spend the 20 minutes doing that particular task. They just log into Oracle Financials to make sure everything was loaded from the previous day and they didn't get any errors that resulted from some sort of a bad import. So the second example I want to talk about really quick is an Australian bank. This is a customer of ours that has actually been using RPA longer than we've actually had an RPA product. What's interesting about this use case is it really emphasizes some of the metrics around why you want to implement RPA. And we'll talk about this and jump into Q&A, but there are problems with a very inefficient process, very slow response time. What the use case was is a customer calls up to the bank and wants to change the bank account that they use for their automatic payment. It was taking weeks, and you've probably heard this if you ever had to do this in your own, where the operator tells you, hey, thank you for the new account information. It'll be 1 to 2 payment cycles before we'll get the new account information loaded up. Well, the reason why is because of all the different steps required. When they implemented RPA, when they used a consulting partner, just like we did in our particular use case, in the first 2 months, this is why this is so interesting around RPA. In the first 2 months, they were able to process 15,000 loan variations. And over the first year, 120,000 days of customer wait time. I mean, just think about the ROI in the customer satisfaction scores that will result when you save 120,000 days of people waiting on the phone. And back end time is 11,000, almost 12,000 hours of manual processes saved. So why was that so impactful? Well, this was the process before. A lot of steps, there's an offshore team, everything was manually handed off, there was batch printing, there was scanning of the forms in, it was validation manually, making sure the account existed, it was the right account. A lot of manual steps. Every single one of these took a lot of time and a lot of people to go and process. So with RPA, they actually went ahead and automated the entire process end to end. So before, that old process took 14 days to go through from end to end. Now they're able to do the same thing with no people involved, with the exception of a very small onshore exception handling team, but doing all that same thing within a day. So fully automated. So reduce security issues, reduce increase speed, reduce the cost of being able to implement that. So really, I just want to emphasize a couple of things, and we'll go right into the questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead and add them to the chat manager now if you've got anything queuing up. But really emphasizing on the time-consuming, error-prone task, and I want to also add enterprise scale, right? How do I make this repeatable, not just for me, but for my entire division, my entire company? How do I put things into a schedule and make these, processes that you can, do over and over and over again, right? So, and as you're looking at enterprise class orchestration, what should you be looking for? Well, you should be looking for a solution that makes it scalable for you, that it makes it, enterprise class. It's running on a server infrastructure. It's running in the cloud. It's always available. It's secure. It's leveraging resilient robots so that you don't have to constantly keep re-recording your process because a version of the application has changed, or your infrastructure changed, or you added a new user that has different preferences and different layout, right? So how do I integrate to, again, go back to what I mentioned before, how do I look at the protocol and look at the application itself as opposed to the user layout and how that looks on the screen? The ROI on RPA, especially when implemented correctly, is significant. Every one of our customers that is implementing RPA has told us that they've got near immediate return on their investment. The very first use case often pays for the license, the support, the implementation costs, the training costs, and then some. I gave you that example before, from our own finance department, 20 minutes every single day, right? That's an hour plus a week. That is 4 or 5 hours a month. That is, 20, 30 hours. I mean, if you think about the cost of a full-time equivalent, right there, that very first use case funds a year of implementation and operations of an RPA product. Every other use case after that becomes essentially, you could think of it as pure profit, right? There's no cost to it or minimal cost to implementing additional use cases. Low risk, reduce risk of human error. So how do I actually remove the cost of human error? As people, our natural instinct is we think we can do it better. We know how to cut corners and do it safely. The reality is most companies have to follow a process, whether it's ITIL or some SOX related process, to make sure that we're doing it right, doing it consistently, and we have a complete error-proof mechanism for repeating these processes. And all of this leads to decreased costs and increased productivity. So with that, I ended a couple minutes early here, but with a couple minutes left. But Jose, if we have any questions, be happy to take them now.
Very, very good. Very, very good. Terrific, Eric. And Eric, we have lots of questions, so get ready for this. There was a lot of participants asking questions. So I'm going to ask you to turn off your presentation now, Eric, so that we can see you in the screen. Great. And first of all, thank you for the presentation. You're a true leader and practitioner of RPA. You understand the theory and the practice of implementing RPA, and that's outstanding to have someone of your caliber presenting to us today. So there are a lot of practical questions here on how to make this work and scenarios. So I'm gonna go through as many as we can from the audience here, as many questions as possible. So Rishab asked, what approach should be adopted when implementing RPA in a process having various scenarios in order to reduce the number of exceptions? So what should be the approach for implementing an RPA in a process that has a lot of that has various scenarios, and you want to reduce the number of exceptions?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And actually, I would have to start off with saying that I'm a big believer that when you're looking at automation, that agile is your best friend here, right? So make things modular, make it small, make incremental changes and improvements to the process. So when you're looking at, especially things that have a lot of different individual tasks that you're trying to stitch together, or where a specific task may have multiple outcomes or exceptions to them, is create the individual, we call it an object, but the individual automation objects as modular as possible to handle each one of those. And I'll have to agree that handling exceptions is probably the most time-consuming aspect of that. We were working with on one of our customers with Capgemini about 6 months or so ago, and when their approach for consulting with a customer is about a third of the time is actually sitting down with the customer, whiteboarding what the process is, doing the various recordings, stitching it together, doing a basic test, and 2/3 of the time is handling all of the exceptions and making sure that every error condition, exception condition, result is handled correctly, that it's been hardened, that it is secure, right? And I think security and it should really go hand in hand with exceptions. Make sure that not only handling all of the error conditions that might happen through the actual process itself, but you're also handling the data that you're moving through the process as securely as possible. For instance, if somebody has to start the process off by providing their credentials, making sure that every step along the way that you're storing those credentials in a very secure, safe way, or that you're leveraging correctly a tool like CyberArk or some other credential management system. So to kind of go back to the point I was just making around exceptions is make it as modular as possible. For each exception, create in our particular product, we have the ability to create a library of subflows. Just like in any other coding language, You can create a library for handling a certain kind of error condition, or a premature logout, or a database connection, and then having conditional statements throughout the process that are looking for, did I get an error? Is it successful? Did I receive the response that I wanted to? So for instance, if I have to create a new user in an HR system, did the user get created? And if so, I would expect a result that said user account created. And if I didn't, I should get a different error code. And making sure I capture those and make sure that I'm making a decision in the workflow based off of that. So another way to put that is, when you are doing this as a person, you're going to make certain decision-making criteria. With RPA, the decisions you make along the way aren't any different, but you do have to make sure that you are considering them and that they are part of the entire end-to-end process. One of the things I usually stress around RPA, and I failed to mention it this time, is RPA, and in particular enterprise RPA, really needs to be that entire end-to-end business process. And while you can start with a crawl and move to a run over time, the better you can get to an end-to-end business process and encompass all of the integrations, the tools, the exceptions, the conditions as possible, the more valuable that process will end up being, and the more modular and the more repeatable and consumable it can be to build other processes in your
Eric, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's a perfect bridge to a question that Ravi had about scaling, best practices to scaling RPA across the organization. And Bhaskar also asked about a related question on BPM, or business process management, and the transition from business process management to the RPA applications. We understand that every customer that you work with, every company likes to think of themselves as unique, and they do things in a very unique way. And we may have an approach that's sound, but every organization, we never implement the solution as the best practice, right? We always have to adapt to what the customer thinks is the best practice for them, which in some cases is true. Most of the cases is not necessarily true. But culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we have to adapt to the realities of the customer. And if you had a customer that was open to the best possible approach for RPA implementation, what would that look like from a, would it start with business process management and end-to-end process understanding, and then a mapping of those end-to-end processes into RPA? Describe to us what would the ideal, the best case scenario for implementation of RPA, and then the scalability of RPA in an organization would look like.
Yeah, you've asked actually a lot of questions there, so I'll try and dissect that just a little bit. So a couple of things is, start with the scalability question. So when we look at scalability, it's two factors. One is the infrastructure of the tool, the technology you're implementing, is it scalable? Can it handle 5 concurrent workflows? Well, chances are anybody can do that. Can it handle 500 or 5,000? Well, now you start kind of reducing the number of tools that have the ability to do that. So you want to have a tool set that gives you the ability to, at the front end, to be scalable, right? And I can take my orchestration engine and scale it across multiple servers. So as I grow, as my technology needs change, I can add more capacity. I add another node into the cluster, and I get more capacity, right? Almost immediately, right? And now it's load balanced across multiple nodes. And same thing on the robot side. If I need to spin up another robot server for the purpose of doing another concurrent type of task that's different than the first one. Say, for instance, my process requires me to, it's an HR process that requires me to go to my Siebel application and my Oracle e-business financial application, my Active Directory, and my SAP, and I want to, those are all 4 different clients that I'm going to be using to interface with my systems. I can do them serially and do one at a time, and that process may take 20 minutes waiting for each tool to do its job, go to the next one, or I can do that parallel. Well, be able to do it parallel, because they're all using different technologies, you can't run them parallel all in the same instance and using the same robot. So you want to be able to spin those off and have them executed, simultaneously across multiple different, robot servers. So they have the ability to scale out that robot army, as I called it before, on demand is really critical. So that's the infrastructure side of things. On the process side of things, the ability to get scalable is really around, not confining yourself to, processes that are there because of what the technology dictates. And you hit the nail on the head, because I've heard this with every single customer I've worked with, is we're a snowflake, we're unique, we do things differently. This is the hardest environment you've ever worked with, and we have problems that nobody ever has. The reality is that while no two customers are the same, they all have the same kinds of challenges. And I think that's, it's a very, resilient statement to make across the industry. Everybody kind of has the same problems, just differently. And a lot of it is, they've looked at technology solutions in the past, and they're trying to figure out, how do I force fit my business task into a technology solution? And what ends up happening, the analogy I love to use is, it really is a square peg in a round hole. With a big enough sledgehammer, you can make the peg go into that hole. The problem with that is all the splinters that come off is the business value that you lose as part of doing that. So while we don't encourage you to change your process, the tool itself shouldn't be rigid and inflexible to prevent you from kind of letting the tool, morph around your peg, if you will. And I think that's very key. And that's one of the benefits of orchestration in general is it doesn't come with a bunch of preconceived notions of, this is the best practice that we recommend and everybody's going to implement it the same way. We give you some accelerator packs, some starter kits, some best practices, but then it really, at the end of the day, is up to you to take those and translate that into your own business process. And to make sure that you're doing it your way for how you need to do it. If you are using a mainframe terminal-based application, you want to go, add a user to it, there's probably a right way and a wrong way, but there's probably 3 right ways, and your people are used to doing it the same right way in your company. A different company's adopted a different process. And it was one of the things with the toll booth analogy, I'm going to re-stress, is we're not about reinventing or forcing you to change your process to meet and go into an RPA tool. It really is, how do I have a tool that's flexible enough to automate what I'm trying to do, and then we'll grow with you as your need changes, as you mature in what you're trying to automate, as you're trying to do more sophisticated, advanced things. So again, I would say a combination of a couple of things. One is leverage agile, leverage kind of a crawl, walk, run. Don't wait for it to be perfect before you start putting it into place. Think small and think modular and start building things together. And then when you start looking at BPM is really kind of the next extension. If you think about, crawl, walk, run, BPM is really the transition of that walk out into run, where you start wanting to spin together multiple RPA processes over a long period of time to do a true business process. Think about ordering a server, right? Ordering a server is not just about calling Dell up and saying, hey, I need a box, get it here tomorrow. It's around, well, is it approved? The order fulfillment process, going through the right catalogs. And each one of these individual tasks has something you can automate with either orchestration, a script, RPA, et cetera. But how do I now, kind of bring these all together into kind of a master workflow that is your business, so that you can track the success and completion of each one of these steps? So, that order a server and provision it business process could take 6 to 8 weeks. You're not going to let an RPA process go 6 to 8 weeks. It's going to be, tens, if not, 20s or even 100 different, discrete tasks underneath it. And from our, product perspective, that's the way that we're, growing our space as well. As we have our own business process management module that sits on top of our RPA, fully integrated between the two, so that you can kind of, as you grow beyond just task and process, now you've got the business side where you can do multiple RPAs, robots together, and string them all together in a longer running process. hopefully that answers the question.
It does. It does. That's that you cover a lot of bases because, as you mentioned, there were a lot of questions within my question. But that's fantastic because that's the you had the strategic component and the very practical component, which we really appreciate. Eric, our time is up, and we have a number of wonderful questions from the audience. So what I'd like to do is to ask you, what is the best way for the audience to reach you directly? Is there a place where they can go to LinkedIn and look at what you do, or is there a channel that they can use to learn more from someone like you and what you're doing in the industry?
Yeah, not a problem. So first of all, we got our own webpage. We've got microfocus.com/RPA. That's more of a product centric page. You know, the LinkedIn, that's actually something I'm still working on, is to actually build out my profile to be a little bit more on the RPA side. But if anybody has any questions, I welcome you know, send me an email. You know, it's eric.fisher@microfocus.com, eric.fisher@microfocus.com, and be more than happy to funnel your question in the right place, the right direction, get the right people involved if it's not me, and as we kind of build out our community, and we do have a community website you know, on our website, but we're still building that out as well. With more information for our customers. But in the short term, certainly send me an email, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that were left over.
Eric Fisher, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate all the insights you provided on RPA. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this ends this session. I'm going to finish this portion of the conference, and when I do that, there will be a short survey that will pop up. If you can give us some feedback, we appreciate that. And then we'll restart 5 minutes before the top of the hour with another exciting session on RPA and intelligent automation. So see you soon. Thank you.